かったここに何月何日書いてるのああ、まあ1月結成あ、57年にあ、ロシアシエルねアリバイ講座です皮肉なことに今の愛媛県の東洋はあそこで洋上で大体安城教会マッカーサー特使さあっちの東京方面にいたはずな橋本翔が知ってたで最初から対三極にクーデターはいやっぱり参加してやっぱりやっぱりなマスクして尋常じゃやっぱりなやっぱりな共闘者はやっぱりなんです泳ぎなんて謎がみたいなやっぱり問題になったよよう見ろバーニー・ブラックションさあスモールさあこれすまん俺のことだよお前だったかピアスそうやったかいいだすごいな170センチ171センチぐらいあったセンチぐらいあったすごいわ身長が水沢でした水沢ってあいつやびっくりした水沢ってやっぱボイスチェンジャー使ってた歌詞と思ったよ今年もやりかねえか北方領土の日カレンダーダメなんだアメリカ大使館も襲われてる襲われてるんさフランス大使館襲われてたんだそれは大丈夫ロシア側カバーしないまあ来いよそうかしようよ俺ねスプートニクね日本語版でわざとだ
We can change, as I said, the narrative and help these people, but also help ourselves grow and develop further. Thank you.
知ってたね。起きたね。お前、正午の決まりだ。やっぱりなんかびっくりした。まだ正午。この人はいるんだし。もう圧力かけにやっぱりバーニング戦争ってこれが証拠。もう年表見ればわかる。これが証拠でした。この通りやす。笹川駅から証拠。日本財団が大体今のあなたでどうやって進めるの？ああ、どうせんのさあ、国民弾圧したらさ、内乱罪適用でお前逮捕するって言ったよ。即決死刑にすると言ったよ、まあ。俺ね、大写真の介護もね。ほんで、総称に新山市とはな、名古屋市にあるやろ、会場は。事務所あるやろ、俺の同じやん。さあ、あるやろ、何これやったらさ、教訓出してない。仲間の時も、おのさまにしてる、やばいな。
Respected, fully democratic Turkey, but this also means in the world scene a global actor of EU, peace-bringing EU, welfare-creating EU, employment-creating EU. So I would say that in this case, membership case, the outcome would be win-win-win. So win for Turkey, win for the EU, but also win for beyond.
You will have to define what you mean by Europe and the European Union having its own army. I do not think Europe needs its own army for what I would qualify as the classical Article 5 NATO scenario, in other words, in a conflict with Russia. But Europe should definitely, the European Union should definitely develop the possibility to project hard power without the United States of America. I can imagine a scenario in Northern Africa where you have a combination of terrorism, climate change, migration. It's an ungoverned part of Africa, largely, where Boko Haram meets Al-Qaeda, where Al-Qaeda meets Daesh. In other words, it is not impossible. look at the French and what they did and are doing in Mali, that you would need to intervene militarily, and then the European Union would be on its own. Second scenario, virtual but not impossible, when in the Balkans the demons of the past would raise again. And we should not repeat a situation like we had in the 90s of the previous century, where finally Bill Clinton and the United States of America had to come in to stabilize the situation. I could think about the need for border protection, external border protection, with military means. You're a bit on the border here between the military and the military police, the gendarmerie in French. In other words, if that is meant by President Macron and Chancellor Merkel with the European army, I can follow them. What we should not forget, by the way, is when you talk about European military intervention, that's why I like the qualification European army not much, is that there will always be national parliaments who will decide if those soldiers will be sent into harm's way. So they will not, I hope, talk about a European command and a European parliament which decides this goes to the heart of the sovereignty of nations, and those nations will want to decide themselves. I see the way out as presented by President Macron of France, the European Intervention Initiative, where you can build coalitions of the willing outside the EU institutions. You can build coalitions of the willing, which you will always need for such kind of military operations. Advantage of a coalition of the willing is that after Brexit you can keep Great Britain on board, because they will not anymore be a member of the European Union. At the same time, PESCO, the Permanent Structures Cooperation, should of course continue, important project, but rather bureaucratic and rather cumbersome. So that would be my answer to the question, does Europe need its own army?
So this morning we had a session on the future of mobility, and we actually discussed what does it mean for the auto industry and what does it mean for the cities. If you look at the auto industry, there has never been as much change as there is today. On the technology side, with connectivity, electrification, autonomous driving, on the social domain, with sharing, more urbanization and new ways of working, and also on the regulation side, where it's about emission control and standards, and also on regulation for managing congestions in the city. So we actually covered that. We also talked about what does it actually mean for the cities? How will actually the traffic evolve if you have more AVs and individual mobility through AVs? What would be levers to actually work on getting a mitigation on traffic, and basically how to deal with heightened traffic from autonomous vehicles? What would be the impact of actually sharing more cars, of basically having smaller or basically bus-based autonomous vehicles? And actually, how would you deal with competency-based pricing? How would you actually work as a city to make the whole modal mix work, and in the end get to a better transportation for the whole city?
Strategic mission for Europe has to care on the globalized world. That means to stabilize our neighborship, to stabilize Africa together with others, but Africa is one of the major challenges for Europe as well. And of course, to make our European values as attractive as possible in the global competition, which order is the better one.
Some people wonder why best practices in government haven't spread faster amongst the democracies. When you see, for example, that New Zealand has solved the problem of public finance, why doesn't everybody copy it? Why doesn't everybody copy the way that the South Koreans teach their kids mathematics? Why doesn't everybody copy the way the Swiss decentralize their politics? And I think part of the answer is that we don't really spend nearly enough time looking at what is best practice. I live in the United States, though I grew up in the United Kingdom. One hardly ever hears a reference to other countries' systems in the US debate on healthcare, except when somebody is making a completely caricatured analysis of the way, say, Canada does things. So I think part of what we need to do is stress the need to look at best practice so that politicians and voters become more aware that there are solutions to most of the public policy problems. We just haven't tried them in many countries. On the other hand, I think there's one other side to this that one shouldn't forget. Sometimes you'll meet people who'll tell you, well, the Scandinavians have worked everything out, and Sweden or Finland or Denmark has come up with the perfect solution to policy problems. That's often an argument people make on the left in the United States. But I don't think the solutions that the Swedes came up with in recent decades necessarily would work in a country as large and as diverse as the United States. So let's look at best practice, let's understand which systems deliver the best results, but let's not pretend that one size is going to fit all. Part of the reason for the success of Western civilization, which is where democracy began, was the diversity of systems and the competition between them.
I recently read that information is now the world's most consequential and contested geopolitical resource. I think that's right. Global internet penetration has revolutionized the information domain, and information operations, which aren't new, are dramatically expanding in scale and scope. This is a new challenge for media organizations, which are already facing a business model crisis and declining trust. Meanwhile, AI advances confer strategic advantage to those with access to lots of data. This has implications for privacy, but also for the information advantage that democracies have traditionally enjoyed.
Well, does European diplomacy exist? It's not an easy question, and the answer is yes and no. Yes, in an institutional sense, that is, Mrs. Mogherini today exists, she travels, she can deliver some messages for Europe, but I would say certainly not on the most fundamental issues of foreign policy, because the members of the European Union are, many of them, very old nation states. They have their own foreign policy, defense, security apparatus, and so forth and so on. And I cannot imagine the French diplomacy just to be second to the European diplomacy, and the same with the UK, as long as the UK is in the EU, or the German diplomacy, and I could continue the list. So, in my judgment, the best merit of the EU diplomacy is first to perhaps reduce as much as possible the differences between the various diplomacies of the member states. And this, as such, is not so bad. And also, I think the EU diplomacy can deal with some relatively secondary issues, such as, for instance, I'm thinking of the Timor case in Indonesia, that is, issues which are not at the forefront of national diplomacies, but which nevertheless can have some importance. So, to conclude, I would say that the real European diplomacy will exist only the day when the Europeans have a clear understanding of what they want to achieve, what is the identity of the European Union still to be built, because diplomacy, like defense, has to do with the protecting the identity of a political unit. And I think we have not yet reached the stage when we are able to answer this question: what is our identity, and what is it exactly that we want to protect?
They're certainly similar in one respect that Thucydides wrote about brilliantly in his book on the Peloponnesian War, that when a rising power, as Thucydides wrote about Athens, threatens to displace a ruling power like Sparta, or in the current situation, a rising China threatens to displace a ruling US, alarm bells should sound, grave danger ahead, a significant likelihood of war, real bloody war.
I think China's rise will change the international configuration from the unipolar to bipolar, and also possibly and make the world order and different from before. But it doesn't mean that the China's rise is the only factor to change the current international order. And actually, the Trump administration's policy is more challenging than China's rise to the current international order, because China's policy tries to maintain the order. The reason is very obvious. China benefits from the present order, and meanwhile, the Trump administration believes, and China benefits more from the current order than the United States. That's why they want to change the order, and based on the ideology of anti-establishmentism. So from my understanding, if we're talking about what the ideology and challenging the current international order or the liberalist order is anti-establishmentism in US and populism in the Europe.
I think in economic terms, it's already shaping up to be the Chinese century. By 2014, according to the IMF, China was the world's largest economy by purchasing power parity, and in other respects, China is already the world's largest manufacturer, the world's largest exporter, the world's largest market for a great many important commodities such as vehicles. The question is whether that economic power translates into political power and strategic power, because I think most people would agree, probably even in Beijing, that America remains the world's dominant political power. And the question is, will that economic mismatch between economic power and strategic power change, and China will become the dominant power, not just economically, but politically? It's too soon to tell that, however, on that, because there are a lot of different variables. Will there be a direct conflict between China and the US, for example, over dominance of the Pacific? Will China perhaps be constrained by other things? Maybe there'll be internal disruption to China's politics if it cannot manage to, for example, maintain the current political stability. That could disrupt China's political rise. And finally, there's the question of the rest of the world, because between them, China and the US are not the whole world economy. Other major powers will have a say in this. And at the moment, it looks like most of the other major powers of the world, Japan, the European Union, are closer to the United States than to China. So there's a question whether China, even as the world's largest economy, can become the dominant political power without allies.
I think economic growth, the success or failure of it, will be determined by the degree to which individual countries and regions can supply jobs for the great emerging middle classes of these countries, formerly poor countries. I think isolated from hard labor, or for whom there is too little hard labor to provide jobs. And what will these people do? How will they be employed? And I think that will be a major factor contributing forward. Also, even though the world population is declining, we're still in an era of massive male youth bulges in about 20 or 30 countries. And there's going to be a lot of pressure to provide jobs for people, whether it's in China, in Yemen, it's in Ethiopia, or wherever.
The main question of my talk is if robotics and artificial intelligence and the upcoming industrial revolution are a threat or an opportunity for the world and for manufacturing countries and also for developing countries. And the answer is still unknown, but what is sure now is that we have to invest in the main assets that are characterizing the industrial revolution, the digital transformation, competences, infrastructures, data centers, and all the tools that are fundamental and are considered enabling technologies for the future digital transformation. I also presented the differences between the US, Europe, and China, how they are integrating artificial intelligence into different knowledge and competences and scientific results. For example, in the US, they are investing very much in developing artificial intelligence for humanities, while in China, they are investing in developing artificial intelligence for agricultural application, for producing food, for example. So globalization has obtained some results in terms of being socially connected, but in terms of geopolitics, we still see many differences also in how the digital transformation is implemented in the society. Then I spoke about robotics and how the journey of robotics is coming into us, because robotics was developed for manufacturing countries, for industrial production, and robots are in manufacturing plants. But in recent years, what we have seen is the development of service robotics, which is intended to support services and the offer of services in terms of medical robotics, social robotics, educational robotics. And now what is happening is that robotics is coming into our houses by producing some consumer products and also producing changes in the society in terms of supporting autonomous drive or different products that are revolutionizing business and revolutionizing our life.
We do have a very serious problem of people left behind. The global agenda talks about eradicating poverty, eradicating hunger, having every child in primary and secondary education. We're off track to achieve these things. And that means not just a few people left behind, it means literally hundreds of millions of people missing out. Take education, more than 250 million children, adolescents and youth not in school as we speak. How can those children and youth of the future really contribute to a knowledge economy if denied the most basic access to education? So it is time for the international community to get a grip on the reality of what is happening. If we want a world that is well fed, where people don't live in extreme poverty, where education is a right, not a privilege, we have a lot to do. International development assistance is important, critical for the lowest income countries. For other countries to be prioritising their budget so that their growth is inclusive and sustainable is critical. There are solutions. What's needed is the political will to activate and implement those solutions.
more than 70 million people in the world that are forcibly displaced from their homes, either as refugees crossing borders or displaced in their own country because of war, violence, discrimination, persecution, bad governance. Why is that? The world has become a difficult place where to make peace. We have become unable to make peace and to build peace. So that's the first thing that we need to look at if we want to reduce this global refugee crisis. Meanwhile, what is very important to remember is that 85% of those 70 million people are not in the rich world. They are in poor countries or middle-income countries. So the effort, and the new effort, not just humanitarian, but medium, long-term effort, founded on sound development, both for refugees and for host communities, has to focus on those countries. We have now a global compact on refugees. We will have the first ever global refugee forum in December this year in Geneva. These are opportunity to rally broader coalitions of actors, not just states and the United Nations, but also the private sector, the business community, civil society, academia, to forge new ways to respond to the global refugee crisis and to finally address strategically its root causes.
The question that you're raising, will Syria find a long-lasting peace? Well, the Syrian people deserve a long-lasting peace. Think about it. They've been 8 years now in a horrible conflict which became from local, regional, and frankly international. So the answer is it must be yes. Now, how to do it is where the challenge is coming. And the only way to do it is actually to end the military conflict, because there is no solution. I mean, it's not just a word, it's the truth. There will never be just a military solution, and include everyone. New constitution, elections under the UN supervision, that would be a way to include them.
Well, I'm delighted to be able tonight to address the members of the trilaterals and their guests, and I think my focus will be tonight on three things. One is, multilateralism has been the bread and butter of many of us, certainly at the IMF, and we believe that it has been critical in order to address many of the potential disorders of the world. Multilateralism is under threat at the moment, and I think that we have to make every effort to rejuvenate it, adapt it, and make sure that it continues to help govern particularly the economic developments around the world. That's message number one. My second message will have to do with the much more longer-term consequences of short-term policies and mechanisms, and that is really the consequences of climate change. I believe that many of the issues that we're debating at the moment will mean absolutely nothing in 20 years' time if we have not acted now in order to make sure that the planet remains something that is hospitable for our children and grandchildren. And my third message, which will not surprise any of those who know me or my friends, will have to do with inequality, and in particular the inequality that women have to suffer and have had to suffer for a long time. And while inequality as such is a major disruption, I believe that by addressing women's situation and the inequality that they face, it will help quite a way in reducing inequalities. So we'll try to do that tonight.
We're living through an era of rapid and disruptive change. That's across the board, economy, society, and what we're seeing is that nowhere is that disruption more evident than the trends associated with climate change. We're all familiar with the extreme events, the temperature rises, and the inexorable change that we're seeing to the planet's ecology as a result of climate change. But a major part of that discussion is how does energy transition and decarbonization of our energy system, which accounts for about 2/3 of carbon emissions, how will that impact climate change, and can we enter an energy transition era rapidly enough to mitigate carbon that will take us to a safe future? This is already happening. Renewable energy today is cost competitive on the grid. In a few years, renewable energy has reached 33% of capacity of global power generation. It's the fastest growing segment, and costs are decreasing rapidly. So what we're going to see is a rapid movement towards energy transition that's also going to be disruptive for the business models of today. It's going to imply new geostrategic relationships among countries as countries move away from resource-dependent fossil fuel-based systems into clean energy systems, and the resource is going to become technology, and technology innovation is going to decide the winners and losers in this race.
The challenge of dealing with disinformation narrative is that it's not enough just to check the facts, because by definition, any disinformation narrative doesn't have good facts. They make their facts up. They're actually lying. This is why it's disinformation. So the challenge with disinformation actors is that the thing they have in common is they're really good storytellers. They tell a story that people want to believe. A lot of the time they will appeal to anger, they'll appeal to fear, they'll appeal to hatred, and they will try and stop people thinking. They'll try and get people so enraged that they switch off their critical faculty. That means that for those of us who are trying to challenge these narratives on a daily basis, it's a much more complex challenge than just presenting the facts. You have to have the ability to tell the story, and you have to find an emotion to appeal to which will actually get people to think. Now, fortunately, there is a model of story which works. If you think of the detective story, that's a story where you're putting together evidence and you're telling people this is what happened, this is why it happened, and it appeals to a different sort of emotion. It appeals to curiosity. It appeals to problem solving. And so, a lot of the challenge of dealing with disinformation is presenting the story of how the disinformation was created, how was the trick done, and you can lead people on the story and you can show them this person is telling you that here is a video of somebody attacking a voter at a polling station yesterday, but actually look, this video showed up on CNN 4 years ago in a different context. You can share that voyage of discovery with the person you're talking with, and then they will realize how the trick was done, but it will also sensitize them that the next time around they'll be looking for that same trick. If you teach people very simple skills like searching for a photo online or searching for a video online, you can actually make them proof against that kind of reused content and repackaged content, not just today, but every time this kind of thing comes up. And so really dealing with disinformation, you have to have the facts, but you have to teach the skills as well. You have to give people the ability to solve the problems for themselves, because then you'll be appealing to their curiosity, you'll be appealing to their problem-solving senses, and you'll be appealing to their sense of pride in actually exposing the story in the first place. And those are the kind of emotions which will then counter the anger and the fear and the hatred that disinformation actors try to target.
Cities are one of the greatest innovations of all times, and what's interesting right now is that urbanization is, alongside with digitalization, a very, very strong economic force and force for innovation. As more and more people move into cities and metro areas, and urban areas were important during the industrial era, but they are increasingly important in a knowledge-based economy. And what's interesting, especially for a person like me who comes from a small city like Stockholm, is that there seems to be room for cities outside the megacities as well. There are some really interesting drivers of innovation that are smaller or mid-sized cities, amongst which Stockholm is actually one, but there are a number of examples. And what is important if a city wants to become an outlier or a hub for innovation is collaboration. If you look at urban innovation especially, you need to have a strong public-private partnership. The mayor needs to gather people from private sector, from academia and other stakeholders around the table and work together to solve problems. And I think we see that to a quite large extent right now, and I hope we'll see more of it going forward.
So we had, I have to say, a global meeting with three North American, Asian Pacific and European members of the Trilateral Commission, which was very, very multidimensional, if I may. Multidimensional in the great tradition of the Trilateral Commission by the, I would say, experiences of the members, by the sensitivities of the members, by the fact that it was, of course, a non-partisan, multi-sensitivities meeting, also because the issues that we addressed were very, very multidimensional in all respect. We addressed issues that were of a geostrategic nature, issues that were of an economic nature, profoundly economic nature, issues that were related to environmental issues and difficulties and challenges. And we addressed also these particular challenges for our societies that populism, so-called populism, represent, which is also a largely multidimensional issue. So I think it was really trilateral at its best, and also it was the occasion to confirm some dimensions and orientations of the trilateral and to make new experience, to reinforce in a number of domains our, I would say, franchise as the Trilateral Commission. First, let me mention that the Trilateral is called Trilateral because there is not only the new hemisphere, the US, Mexico, Canada, but also Europe and also Asia. And of course, the whole of Asia at a global level is more and more important. As regards new dimension for the Trilateral Commission, not only we confirmed our own values, democratic values, rule of law, human rights, and all what goes with a democratic society, but we also reinforce and confirmed our values as regards multilateralism, international cooperation, in the best sense of the term. We also said that we would like to be more transparent than we were before at the level of the trilateral as a whole, with a new initiative that we took, in particular the idea of having the display of video to sum up some of the issues that we would have addressed, and also with the idea of making known at the level of the Trilateral Commission all publications, articles, interventions, books that would be displayed or published by the members of the Trilateral Commission. All this, of course, as part of transparency and also as part of being more influential if it is possible. We also have given a mandate to the three chairs to see in which direction we could be more proactive in terms of communication, display of our ideas through various forms. So this is something which we consider very important and is one of the major conclusions of the Trilateral Commission, which took place in Paris.
Sullivan. I am the new chair of the North America Group of the Trilateral Commission. I wanted to take this opportunity to say a few words about the Commission and about our future. As you may know, the Trilateral Commission is a storied institution, an organization with 46 years of history of having an impact on big ideas, on bringing people together across different sectors and across 3 different geographies, that of North America, Europe, and Asia. But we are on the cusp of a new chapter, one that builds on that history, but really reorients ourselves and puts us in a position to make an impact in a very, very different world. And the reason why I have such confidence that the Commission can remake itself is because there is a need, and the Commission is well suited to meet that need. And that need is quite simply that in this day and age, in these political landscapes, the need is simply for more organizations, more individuals, more entities to take up the mantle of defending a rules-based order, an order that values and is committed to democratic principles, ideas like free trade and human rights. And we also have a need for more ideas to help us tackle new challenges, or certainly challenges that are new to this generation. And there are many reasons why I think the Trilateral Organization is so well poised to meet this need. First and foremost, we are an organization that at its heart is a community of countries that share a common set of values, that share these commitments to these ideas about democracy, about free markets, about the rule of law. And secondly, we have a membership that spans policy, business, and academia and media. And that allows us to bring minds together and experience to bear on problems that are no longer just the purview of one of those sectors. The things that need to be thought about today and where we need new solutions and prescriptions are ones that are at the intersection of business and policy. Whether it is the contributions that private sector organizations can make to combating climate change, whether it is figuring out the ideas that will drive the reform of capitalism, or whether it is understanding the impact of technology on our systems, all of these things need business, government, and others at the table to help with. Now, of course, to realize this potential for the Trilateral Organization to meet this need, we are going to have to do some things differently than we have in the past. First and foremost, we are going to have to recognize, as a group primarily of democracies, we need to spend some time looking at ourselves, looking internally, saying what's happening with our own institutions, what is the health of our own institutions, and how is that situation affecting our ability to cooperate across national lines and deliver global problems to pressing global solutions. So we're spending more time talking about things like populism and the impact of technology on our own societies. Secondly, we've got to think about impact differently. Traditionally, we're an organization that has had impact based on the very nature of our relationships. We're an organization of people who have close ties to national governments, and often the ideas that we debate in private inform our own perspectives and inform our discussions and deliberations and conversations with people in positions of power. That will still be true, but today we need to think about having an impact on the broader debate. We no longer live in a world where governments are the only ones that can influence the future. In fact, increasingly, we have to think about other entities as being the real engines of change, and be that corporations or universities or even individuals. We need to think about how to shape the conversation, how to bring those groups in, to have investment in and commitment to solutions, and we need to move ahead whether or not we're able to get our governments to agree with our prescriptions and recommendations. So in short, it's a really exciting time to be part of the Trilateral Commission. I'm deeply honored to be the new chair of the North America Group, and I look forward to working with all our members and my colleagues from other regions to realize this vision. Thank you.
The role of political parties in the political processes of countries has been always to A, intermediate the demands of society, and second, to organize the process of political competition, to mobilize the population access to power. The first objective, the one of intermediation, has been badly eroded by technology, by the social media, because people have direct access to the politicians, to society in general, to make their demands directly to the people. However, nothing has replaced the means to access to power. And the problem that societies in the world all over are facing these days have to do essentially with the fact that governments have been unable to perform well. So I believe that the real problem is not political parties, but the lack of ability of governments to deliver in poor conditions. The governments have been unable to deliver for very obvious reasons. First of all, because it's much more difficult to govern in the era of ubiquitous information, because governments no longer have control of the sources of information, because they compete for information and for communications with the people in general. So the real problem is not political parties. The real problem is that societies in the world are lacking legitimacy. It's interesting to watch that there are a few governments in the world that know how to govern and have succeeded in maintaining the legitimacy of their systems. And in those countries, political parties are not losing faith. So the real issue for the looking forward is to create conditions for the people to have access to the political process without undermining the legitimacy of those societies. And that's not something easy to accomplish. It'll take a dramatic effort of leadership, but not necessarily from politicians. It will take an enormous effort of society and the people to be able to create new forms of participation within which the political parties will always be important. The political parties, however, are fragmenting, are responding to the reality of fragmentation of societies, and they are not likely to be the ones to lead this process. One ought to look only at the election in the United Kingdom a few weeks ago to realize that this is likely what is likely to happen. They're the Brexit party, which is not looking for power, it's just looking for an issue.
なんか VH も来てるそうやな。
The citizens around the world are going to have to be much more responsible in creating conditions for accessing power and for making it possible for stability and legitimacy.
全然会ったことないわ。生で。すまん。詐欺でした。詐欺やってね。詐欺やって。
The best way for companies to serve the digital revolution is to build trust with their customers and to build trust with their employees. One of the ways in which companies can do that is to have frank conversations with the workers, to sit down with workers and their unions and to say, look, here's the challenges that we're facing, but importantly to ask them, how can we best get there? Because all too often, a lot of those solutions that a company can put in place that make a real difference, the employees know the answer to that.
Multilateralism
大体会ったことないやつに。
not only the
どこ言われ
best,
たくねえよ。
in many cases the only way in which you can deal with global issues, because we're dealing with global challenges and therefore you need global solutions, you need multilateral solutions. They take a little longer, yes, of course, but once you get it, then they will stick around for longer and you will get greater ownership and therefore you will tend to have more effective solutions. The other way is that, of course, unilateralism is always about who is stronger in a bilateral relationship. And therefore, by going multilateral, what you do is you balance and all the opinions count. Of course, you always have the bigger countries speak louder, but the differences are less, and also the needs of the smaller countries, the needs of the developing countries, the needs of the groups in a society that are left behind, then they are much better
realized by a multilateral approach. So yes, today we need multilateral more than ever before.
やっぱり通報食らってたわ。いや通報食らってるわ。
Concluded the meeting here in Stockholm of the European section of the Trilateral Commission. I think it's been a great meeting. I think we've been able to have a dialogue on a lot of the issues that are of concern to all of us. Where are we going on the climate issues? How is the digital transformation going? What is the security really going to look like in the digital world? Where is Russia heading? What are the Americans up to? What will be the consequences of Brexit? So virtually all of the issues that are topic of concern to us Europeans at the moment have been on the agenda during these particular 2 days in Stockholm. And then I think we have also been enjoying the company of this very diverse and very interesting and increasingly young group that is the Trilateral Commission Europe.
はい、続きね。ごめんなさいね。この通り大丈夫だと。
I suppose the question we're all asking is, will the Brexit saga ever end? After 3 years after the referendum, the British still haven't decided what they want to do, and they're now in an election. I suppose that the answer to the question depends on who wins the election. In order to try and answer that question, you have David Lidington, who was Mrs May's number 2 in the last government, and who chose not to serve under Mr Johnson, the current Prime Minister, and he's going to tell us who's going to win the election and whether that's going to bring things to an end. And I'm going to disagree with whatever he says.
まあそういうわけだ。はい。
Technology is not a threat to democracy. I believe that technology can enable our democratic principles of freedom of speech, freedom of assembly, and really freedom of information so that we can make smart decisions about how and where we want to take the future of our countries. I think we have to be mindful of how the technology can be used against us and educate our citizens about those risks. But I think that technology truly is an enabler of our society and that we should continue to embrace it, not refrain from it.
To some extent, the school of the future for the adult workforce will essentially not be a school. Many people will have to continue to learn, continue to reskill, continue to upskill, but they'll do that inside their workplace. We will need to ensure that at least 2 to 3 months of learning are integrated into every single year that somebody is at work. The second thing that we know is that the Fourth Industrial Revolution is changing workplaces and the needs of the labor force so quickly that we're also going to need to quite fundamentally reform education systems. And that applies to the delivery and it also applies to the content. One, we need much more technology integrated into schools. And second, we need to ensure that young children are understanding how to apply these technologies in the future, understanding how to collaborate with each other rather than compete with each other, and understand how to apply critical thinking so that they're able to continue to learn throughout their life course.
So many unicorns up here in Nordic countries, and I think especially if you look at Sweden and Finland, Estonia, of course, in a class of its own. I think that it starts with fantastic education. We really have a foundation of education here in Nordic countries that doesn't kill initiative, doesn't kill creativity, and of course that is what it takes to be an entrepreneur. You need creativity, you need to be able to take initiative. So I think that's something that is really enabling this whole thing here up in the north. And then of course we have fantastic catalysts, events like Slush that a slush. You know, it happens every year in Helsinki, in Finland. And when you come to this part of the world, you know, be it Stockholm, Helsinki, Tallinn, it's definitely going to be cold, dark. There's going to be slush on the ground. So it's very clear that it's not the Silicon Valley. It's much, much better. And it's much, much better because it's different. We have 2,400 volunteers from more than 60 countries that build this fantastic event called Slush. And it's really the young people. They're volunteering. They're there doing and making that happen because they want to be there. They love to be there. Not because somebody told them that, you know, please do this, please do that. But they're there because they want to be entrepreneurs. They want to make things happen. And they build this event for a few years. The best and biggest on the planet, and after that they go off and they build fantastic startups. So I think that the whole Nordic model is about enabling people to do things and giving the people, the young people and all of us the skills needed to be successful. We also have a fantastic safety net, so we all know that when you try to do new things, more often than not, you fail. And what do you do then? Hopefully you don't end up in the streets, you know, and dying, but actually you try again. And I think that here in the Nordic countries, it's fantastic to be an entrepreneur because you're not, if you fail, you're not going to find yourself without a roof over, your head, but you're actually, you have a safety net. You can go out there and you can try again and again, and before you know it, you build your first unicorn, and after that, hopefully go and build the next one. So I think that is one reason why we have the highest density of unicorns anywhere on the planet, here in Nordic countries, and of course our friends in Estonia are really in a league of their own in this. 1.3 million people, and they have 4 unicorns, Playtex, Skype, TransferWise, and now the latest one being Bolt. 1.3 million people, 4 unicorns, that's more than 10% of all the unicorns in Europe actually. So the rest of Europe needs to get its act together. And then I think that if you look at this unicorn per capita, in China they have more unicorns than anywhere else, 200, but they also have more people, 1.4 billion people. So if you do the math, in China you need 7 million Chinese people to build just one unicorn company, while in Estonia they are much more efficient, only roughly 3,000 people you need to build one unicorn. So that's actually quite exceptional. So I think that we should all be more like Estonia. And that's something that we can definitely strive to here in Europe. So let's go out there and do things, and we'll end up with lots of new unicorns all over Europe.
これが本物のユダーバーでした。すごいですね、佐々木町の発展たち。すいませんね、私も冬か知らなくて。
For us in the European round table, which gathers the 55 largest companies, most important companies in Europe, Europe's competitiveness is absolutely key. The world is changing. We see lesser of continued work for free trade, more protectionism growing in both East and West. And we as companies, we realize that we will not be long-term successful unless Europe is successful. And there are a few challenges that really stick out here. First, it's digitalization. The world is becoming digital through artificial intelligence and through the rollouts of 5G. This opens up for huge opportunities in every single part of society. But Europe is lagging behind here. We need to speed up there. We need to invest more, do more. Then we have the Green Deal. Europe is in the lead in this. And this is an area where we can take advantage of business opportunities, and it's important, of course, for the planet. So that's an area where we also have to come together. And then, of course, we are believers in free trade or free trade under agreed rules, and this is now a threat, and we need to stand up for it. But also, we need to be realistic and make sure that we navigate this new landscape in an effective way.
So I am a complete believer of public policy
policy and the power that it can have in moving the market. I believe in strong states that can send the correct signals to markets to move in the direction we want. What states can do is actually to promote the good and tax the bad. And states are there to promote the greatest public good. I have experiences in many, many parts of the world where bold and clever public policy has actually ramped up industrial competitiveness and the growth of markets, in particular renewable energy markets. I can state the case of Latin America, of several Latin American countries, for example, in the case of Mexico, in the past few decades, bold policy in giving a clear vision as well as renewable energy targets and leaving the markets to set up the prices was and drove the lowest solar price for renewable energy in the world in 2017. You can count that example and many other examples where bold public policy has actually catalyzed an industrial revolution for the good. We are in a moment of a planetary emergency. We are both in a nature crisis as well as in a climate crisis, and if the states don't raise up their bar and put strong policies in place, it's going to be difficult that we get where we want to get. Businesses are waiting, progressive businesses are waiting, but if we don't have a common playing ground, it's going to be difficult for us to ramp up the mass of the businesses and non-state actors that are ready to act.
まあ、あれはこれでいいよ。でも、わかんねえんだけど。
Well, on the one hand, the European Union is very well equipped. We have been doing quite a lot of trade agreements in the world the last years. In the European Union, the Commission negotiates on behalf of 28 member countries, which gives us a big strength. We just concluded agreements with Canada, with Japan, with Singapore, with Mexico, and others are in negotiations. But of course, with the changing climate, with countries not respecting WTO rules, countries going increasingly bilateral, there is a challenge there. So we are looking at how to reform our policies, of course, to be still able to do trade agreements, to strengthen the WTO and reform it with other like-minded countries, but also to protect ourselves against countries who are not playing according to the rules, and to make sure that the level playing field is respected. We have changed our trade defense mechanisms. We have implemented a coordination mechanism for investment screening, and we are looking at how to sharpen our tools. And this will be a key issue for the new commission coming in as well.
まあ、区はね、さあ、これでいいよ。いやー、私も初めて見に来た。さあ、なんでかというと、もう漁ってたりんさ。それは青いの久保総君が証明です。彼がもう移転作業してたんや。急にアンプロダクション作ったそうやろ。では、あんたらの安保闘争の賠償大コントに決定したんや。テアトルエコのね。トラックバーガーのね。青いとの大ヒント小説は、対廃墟クーデターみたいなのが、日本俳優連盟のクーデターやってたんや。ほんでマネジメント局言ったんやけど、だから西だと。
Because a second referendum, it might well lead to a narrow vote to remain in the EU, but that would not end the division in the United Kingdom. And of course, if Mr. Johnson wins his majority, then we've got to negotiate the new relationship on trade, on security, on foreign policy cooperation between the United Kingdom, which will remain a big European power, a major player in defence and security.
直接ね、応援歌うこればよかったよ。
Those 27 countries are going to be my country's most important trading partner, our closest geographical democratic neighbours,
as far ahead as I can possibly see. So working
起きた
that
ね、言っ
through
とけよ、最
is
後
going
から
to
ね。
take, I fear,
もう、
a year, more than a year, I would estimate.
どうおかしいと思ったらさ、嫌われてるって知って。
Responsibility both on UK political leaders but also on EU political leaders to get this right. European democracy is under massive strain from Russian aggression, from dramatic economic change that is adding to public mistrust in the way in which we do business. So getting geopolitics right, having a constructive future relationship between the UK and other members in the EU27.
乗ってるからさ、ちゃんと乗ってるから。大体ジャニーズ事務所もほんなわね。会社役員やったら、まあね、最初から渡るうるさいんやて。ジャニーズ事務所は上。こんな前で上なってるやん。この裏の境に拉致したってことやね。だからおかしくなったよね。俺でも気づいた。
I believe that because as we train the new generations of in the workforce, we know that we need to create materials that are a lot more engaging, that are a lot more useful, and that are going to have an impact in the way that they learn and in the way that they acquire the new skills that they need in order to remain competitive in the marketplace. What a better way to do that than through video games? As children, we learn through playing. And we believe that through gamification and through game-based learning, we can make learning fun again, not only for children, which we know is the best way to learn,
大体俺を拉致したいやつに言われたくねえよ。田中昭彦は、お前革命の際逮捕するから覚えとけよ。俺は首相になったら即刻逮捕命令だぞ。サイバーのようにね、それに大阪危機のようにちょっと逮捕するわ、お前。
And finally, by
resource
doing
launch.
video games through the simulators, they will be able to have experiential learning to get the feedback on what they're doing right, what they're doing wrong, and learn from that.
まあ、いいわ。
Very clearly, I think the world is moving towards circular economy. It's a necessity when you look at water scarcity, when you look at waste pollution. Everybody is now aware of that. If we want to make a conciliation between the planet for our children and economic development, we need to move towards a circular economy, and by education, by innovation, by a different way of doing business, both for citizens and also by companies, we will make this move which will help us collectively to have a planet great again. Thank you.
The future of entertainment in the 21st century is going to be shaped by the twin forces of globalization and digitalization, both of which are going to be terrific for consumers. Digitalization means that people will be able to consume entertainment wherever and whenever they want. And globalization means that that opportunity will be given to people around the globe. While there's some concern that large companies are going to dominate the future of the entertainment landscape, I actually have a different view because I feel that digitalization is very empowering to creators. And when you think about a phenomenon like YouTube,
今やから明かされるの。だからびっくりしたオニプロダクションの久保ス。何年乗ってんのこういうことだった。ある。Heroneem Retinger. Ah, non è detto. Vedi cosa figo.
Entertainment with many more choices than we have, and that also means a greater democratization of ideas. And again, all of this is happening on a global scale, which is really enabled by digital
なんて認める気もない。
What is actually the biggest threat from cybersecurity for Europe? Of course, we can concentrate and focus on the security side, but I would think a bit on the other side that if we really go to focus too much on the security side, then it really will slow down our development. I think it is the biggest threat is that we lose competitiveness, and that is for me.
ハーグに移送する方針かダメか。
We should also know innovation, it has two aspects. First, I think you must have a great idea, but you must be the first. So that means speed. And we must make sure that we have an ability to be innovative and to be the first and to have speed. So for me, that is the biggest threat of cybersecurity, to get a slowdown.
ちょっと
So are we suffering from eco-anxiety? The simple answer is yes, possibly too much. Eco-anxiety is definitely triggered by the fact that we are facing a very urgent matter with climate, but at the same time, it's also because we're facing something that is very complex. It's very difficult to understand the impact of climate change, and it's very difficult to understand the solutions to reach a low-carbon economy. So in the world of investment where I am, what I see is that those who are actually acting every day to invest in climate change investments and low-carbon economy investments are actually less susceptible to eco-anxiety because they can see the result and the impact of what they do. But really what is needed to decrease this anxiety is more examples of impactful investment, change of behavior in society that would actually bring people to less anxiety.
I think we had been in a situation where U.S. and West European support for Ukraine was very well coordinated, and we were maintaining a consistent pressure on Russia to begin to negotiate seriously about ending its occupation of eastern Ukraine. Unfortunately, I think now the impeachment dynamics in the U.S. have really knocked U.S. policy off the table. We don't have the people, we don't have the engagement, we don't have the same focus, and as a result, I think that takes a lot of the pressure off of Russia to negotiate. I'm hopeful that as we have a Normandy format summit, possibly on December 9th, it may take a little bit longer, that can retain some of that negotiating dynamic. But I'm afraid that right now the situation is much more difficult for Ukraine than it should be.
What is the role of civil society in modern Russia? I would say it's a very important issue. Why? Because in Russia, political competition is limited, there are no real opposition parties, so the society stands up to the autocratic regime through organizing itself, through building trust, through providing public goods that the corrupt and inefficient state cannot provide. And it's not just protesting corruption, it's not just about asking for democracy and rule of law. Civil society today is working on helping the poor, helping the disadvantaged, fighting domestic violence, promoting gender equality, defending minorities. So this is actually where the European future for Russia is. And luckily, with the new communication technology, with internet, it's easier to organize itself, it's easier to inform itself, and it's easier to promote change, creating new Russia that eventually will become part of greater Europe.
time when 1,000 NATO troops are stationed at the border between Estonia and Russia to deter possible Russian aggression, when President Macron is speaking about what he calls cercle concentrique, when citizens in Moldova and Georgia are questioning whether Europe and the US will come to rescue if there is a security guarantee, and when sanctions against Russia and counter embargoes have become kind of the very essence of the idea of a European security policy, well, what can we expect from Russia? We know that Putin is actually more popular than most of his competitors. But will Medvedev be a different leader than Putin? In short, can we expect a different kind of trajectory from Russia in the coming years when the bureaucratic elite inside Russia is focusing more on digitalization than what some might call modernization? As always, the views on Russia are divergent.
勝負してたらやっぱりなやばい埼玉地検が起訴したことでさなってもたんや責任取ってもらうぞ
Developments in these last few years are showing us that the strength of the EU relative to individual countries is not constant over time. I believe we can say that the EU is strongest towards candidate countries when a country wishes to accede to the European Union or to the Eurozone. It tends to follow the suggestions and the prescriptions of the EU as much as possible to make progress. And that is the moment when the magnet effect of European integration is really great, and by the way has induced countries in the past, if we think of the Balkans for example, also to establishing better relations among each other in order to qualify for membership of the EU. Then the problem is that sometimes relative vis-a-vis member states, the EU is not so strong in terms of leading them to respect its own rules as pro-Europeans would like to see. And we can even see in recent years, for example, a greater leniency in terms of allowing infringements of the Stability and Growth Pact. But then the most recent experience is how difficult it is for a country to leave the European Union if it so decides. And the monumental example of Brexit shows us that vis-a-vis a member state which wants to leave the European Union, the European Union still has quite a remarkable power. We have seen in the case of the negotiations on Brexit the EU displaying really unexpected unity among the 27, also thanks to the skills and determination of chief negotiator Michel Barnier. And we are seeing how difficult it is for the UK to get its act together. And this, in my view, should be also kept in mind by countries here and there where governments play with the idea of perhaps leaving one day the EU or the Eurozone. They better keep in mind that it is tremendously difficult. If it is proving to be so difficult for a country of the standing, the experience, the administration of the quality of the UK, I don't want to imagine other specific examples of countries where the politicians sometimes say, let's get rid of the EU, not only
JI
international process.
吉田茂言ってましたよ。出撃中でしたよ。どうする
When one thinks about the 2015 migration crisis, it is true that we have gone a long way as a European continent. And we've gone a long way because in 2015 we were hit with a massive crisis. Hundreds of thousands of migrants coming to Europe's shores. And that is not the case anymore. It is true that the overall
あえてある親族見せてるよ。
But is that enough?
小泉純一郎さんが郵政民営化反対したね。聖子さんね。除名処分を食らったやろさ。除名処分。誓約書書かされてようやく復帰したよ。同じことやって。
Such as Spain, which have taken a far greater hit than others when it comes to migration crisis. And yes, the numbers are overall down, but problems do persist in countries like the ones I just mentioned. So the question one needs to ask is, has Europe done enough in order to alleviate the effects of the crisis throughout the entire EU 28? Has Europe done enough in order to share burdens? And I say that particularly because when one looks at the figures regarding relocation of refugees across Europe, then one will realize that not enough has been done in that direction. And so one is led to the question, what kind of Europe do we want? Do we want a Europe where we all share the benefits of Europe, or do we also want a Europe where countries also share burdens?
事前に訪問してました。ごめんね。アリバイ工作はあった。どう説明するのだこれ。
Well, now it is the end of the Ljubljana meeting, which was a great meeting. We have had excellent discussions. We have learned a lot, and we have thought a lot. And now I hope to see you in Paris next June. It will be a plenary session. And all of us, we shall be there. So please do come to Paris.
面会の条件は
Does the European Union need its own army? Well, here's what I think. The vision of a European army is actually a useful vision because it is good to know what the long-term goal might be. But is the European army something we can put together right now? No. And why not? First and foremost, because the European Union does not even have the mechanism to come up with clear political decisions and to speak with one voice in crisis. So the first step which we in the European Union need to take together is to change our decision-making process. We need to go from consensus to qualified majority voting. We need to learn that all of us, whether we are 27 or 28, will only be listened to, will only be respected, and can only be a military actor in the world if we speak with one voice. And that requires majority voting. So that's step number one. And the next steps are capabilities, and we will need to work on that also. And then we can think of the long-term vision of a European army.
この時ね。
So I'm Jane Harmon, and the question is, what is the future of political parties? I can speak to the U.S. more than anywhere else. I was a member of our Congress for 9 terms and left because it became so partisan and dysfunctional. At the Wilson Center, we study this, and there are some remedies to the problems. But bottom line, in the U.S., our tradition is 2 parties only. In Europe, there are party systems in most countries, and we're seeing the rise of populist parties. In the U.S., we have no populist party. We have a Republican Party that is now dominated by our president, and we have a Democratic Party where most of the noise is coming from the far left. What we don't have is anything to represent the center, and that is the challenge for the U.S. going forward. That is something I work on, and that is something that the Wilson Center is hoping to improve, because if we are to convey at least a majority view in the United States, essential to making our foreign policy and domestic policy effective, we need to reach for the center so that we have both parties participating. And hopefully we'll advance that goal here at the Trilateral Commission.
それはこいつらのやはりお前らの背後にいたってことだ。
So we had a marvelous meeting in Stockholm. We
やはり背後にいたようなお前らもか。だとなんだとこいつら何とやがしもださなんでさあ遅っああみんなが遅だそれはこいつだねかわいそう10代の時に伝えろ SP とこれなんだか分かった何の意味だと分かった皆さんもうこの時点で
which was again very comprehensive and stimulating. But you will see that in the various videos perhaps that you would like to see. Now I have to give you a new rendezvous. We have rendezvous in Washington because it would be the trilateral at the level of the three pillars of the trilateral.
ああおかしいと思った。
And this is the Washington meeting which will take place in March.
だからお前さすまんねお借金150万円工面してくれもうあいつ再犯してもたんやさ2009年か2010年の暴力事件起こして辻君かやっぱりな俺怒ってたんかよあれ榎本敦子さんさ言ったやん示談したんやそうなんやびっくりしたろ榎本敦子さんこれ原因でアーツビジョンやめさせはい、やめさせ今 AT のプロに移ったやっぱりやめさせられたからすいませんね本当にやっぱりボイコットしてたからみんなの友達に昨日とおぎえさんと最初ね岡山明美さんとねだからさ最初ね初のね 4人制のプリキュアになる予定やったよところがダメやった女が邪魔したやっぱ女かだからお前最初からお前ら
accepted the so-called five Federica Mogherini principles almost 4 years ago. Both sides apparently believe that time is playing on their side and they can sit on their hands waiting for something to change. However, I think that on both sides we see more and more fatigue and more intention to start gradually rebuilding this relationship. I do hope that the
森高やっぱりな森高誰探しと思った最近ね誰が信号時代ごめんなぜか激戦区やったわけだやっぱりなあったけ本当にすいません本当にすいません安保クーデターねすいません当事者がいがやったわ
conflicts, and even the word war is, I think, a bit overstated because wars end up being zero sum. One wins, one loses. And in the case of trade, it should be a win-win operation. So I think the analogy is mistaken, and by closing off your own markets, you increase costs to your own people. In the United States, about 50% of imports are for commodities or intermediate goods, so if you raise those costs, you raise costs for manufacturers and consumers in the United States, or same would be the case in Europe. And in the case of the US and China, I think we're in a dangerous situation.
周防と森田打倒がやっぱりなそう揉めたからこれで警察はねやっぱりなこれでいいか俺工藤会のメス行ったよそれは嘘や嘘や大丈夫後ろの射程が襲われたんねん警察はね僕団体ならいるんですよやっぱこだま名前やったねどうりおかしいからさが陽一だねさあなんで歳月言ってたやっぱり欠席者やっぱりなあんなやっぱ止めたか忍ぶつけた吉田氏歳月やめろって言ったよさあもう一つみんな反対してたんですよ東条英機の名誉法あれ採決したことで怒ったやんさああれが見なさいみんな国会か岸信介を引きずりますそうないやろみんな賛成してたやんそう意外やろ池田優斗さんと佐藤栄作佐藤栄作さん公務員さんおかしいやっぱり採決欠席者やっぱりなもう見えたから反対したから反対してたよやっぱり揉めたか揉めたか揉めたか大体井上の証拠出せって言うねもしくは一言ハグとか証拠ですけどあと新山駅の看板証拠ですやっぱ告発的に掲載者がやっぱりなおかしいと思ったら最近できたもんやからやっぱりなやっぱ新山警察署も調べてたやっぱりなおかしい多分松山署アウトはやっぱりアウトやったからだからやっぱりねやっぱおかしいってさ何年警察署にやっぱりねほんで今でも乗ってないしびっくりしたそう乗ってないんだやっぱりねなんで乗ってないんだ敵山根総さんの遺族たちパン参戦の風魔掲載するからさクリちゃんそうじゃなかったやっぱりねやっぱりな JI の件おかしいもう俺大塚千賀喋ってたらねだって大塚千賀さん知ってるからやっぱりな参加してたからやっぱりな全額でだからなんでトヨタねトヨタがね全労組決やっぱり安保県でやっぱトヨタがトヨタ餃子のおやじさんやっぱりなやっぱりなトヨタ企業社長知ってますよ見ましたよトヨタの経営逆に言うとトヨタの鈴木ねイズズもね日産もね日産は彩華まで彩華汚職が入れ赤字になるまでないところ黒字だったら思ったよやっぱりな被害と同時にやっぱ急成長安保闘争成長期が入ったからやっぱりねおかしいと思ってんねなんで1年も革命じゃないかよさ俺もあんまり使えなくなったさ最近戦争もな宣戦布告なしで起こるってそれと知ってたよ俺と同じやったよだからクーデターした軍隊したりそれはないクーだって加藤のクーデターあれ大変が来た塩崎はそうねやっぱな森吉をしっかり行こうって言ってあれ小泉純一郎君とね小泉純一郎君とね安倍晋三君が言ったよさもう辞任せって言ったよもう 苦情が来たんやん、生物。来たんやん。指示の。皮肉が藤井裕二はね、クーデター反対だと。おい、おかしいと思った。小釜こと言って、通りおかしいと思った。大政一君知ってたよ。やっぱりな、揉めたか。アウトか、もう。やっぱな、オスカーもね、なんで結成したか。やっぱりな、第二次安保闘争。さすがにもう、結成してもだよ、そのオスカー。弁償代行してるよね。やっぱりな、弁償代行してるよね。なんか一世界のおかしいと思った。森田か。今ね、当事者がいたんです。やっぱりな、俺もそうだ。佐川さん、知ってました。あんな安保闘争どうやって採決するんや。って言ったよ。だよ、ニューヨークの巨頭と民有研究。佐川良一さんね。言ったよ、岸信介と吉田茂。もうやめろ、採決。やめろって言ったよ。これ以上すると、赤木大臣、赤木長官ね、さあ、発砲するぞって、発砲沙汰になるぞ、戦争沙汰になるぞ、内戦の危機になってたんや。内戦の危機になってた。最悪や、内戦の危機になってた。これ前もって通りました。これは私でした。はい、これは俺のことです。刹那ジョリーでした。レティングは最初か。ごめん、俺、最後はジョリーだから。アンジェリーナ・ジョリーさん、そうかよ。最近本名歌手があって、英語の軍裁判所に出頭してるから。深刻な家庭。名前変更、結構難しいらしい。難しい。びっくりした。はい、この通り。じゃあ、この通り、アリバイト。もう1959年1月1日で結成する通りでね、もう結成。久保田健一。久保田健一はもうこの時点で理事の評議員の立場に。そうなんです。こっそりね、はい、ルパン三世の、飛びた頃に対し、廃墟にクーデター、やっぱりクーデター起こしたら、今すぐの裏で使うけど、やっぱりしてないよ、安保と。再建会、やっぱり、フレンス4000結成者が学園の裏で活躍する、小川選手。そう、やめろって言ったよ、敵しのぶって、止めに来て、もう。あんなよ、藤井裕二のコントで、はい、忍ぶつけし。水沢藤のこいつ、よく、こだまのまたバットはね、俺は軍が介入したんで、撃退さん、今回はスティンガーみたいな RPG 持ってるでしょ、最悪だった。